Olá, meus amigos, bem-vindos à programação Língua Portuguesa aqui no canal 49. É com muito gosto que estamos na vossa companhia para mais uma edição do programa Os Portugueses no Vale, que há 28 anos está aqui no ar, no canal 49, ao serviço das comunidades de origem portuguesa e de língua portuguesa e de origem portuguesa também, aqui no centro da Califórnia, desde a zona de Bakersfield no sul até a zona de Misk no norte. O canal 49 também poderá ser visto em qualquer parte do mundo, portanto, através da internet. Os nossos programas são arquivados na YouTube, etc. Portanto, é com muito gosto que estamos na vossa companhia e hoje, mais uma vez, mais uma conversa sobre os portugueses e as vivências portuguesas e luso-americanas aqui no estado da Califórnia. Vamos conversar em inglês, o nosso programa hoje, mas sabemos que a maioria dos nossos amigos telespectadores conhece, ou, portanto, ou fala inglês, ou arranha aqueles que não falam, mas arranham algum inglês, e por conseguinte, nós, como todos vós sabeis, e já aqui o dissemos, nós vamos ter pelo menos dos nossos 52 programas que fazemos por ano, vamos tentar ter pelo menos 20 a 25 desses programas em, portanto, inglês ou então bilíngues. Mas sempre, mesmo quando eles são em inglês, são sobre a temática portuguesa e a presença luso-americana no estado da Califórnia. Portanto, permaneçam connosco, porque vamos falar da cultura e das vivências portuguesas e luso-americanas, mas no idioma inglês. It's our pleasure to have today a dear friend and an exceptional writer, a great, I'm sure great, I haven't taken the course, but I'm sure great mathematics professor, and a Portuguese-American who is originally from the Valley, who does not live in the Valley, but is originally from this area, and who we are going to be talking about his literary involvement, his books, and in general about the Portuguese-American community in California. Anthony Barcellos is an author from this area who lives as a professor in Sacramento. Anthony, welcome, first of all. Thank you for taking the time to drive all the way down to busy 99
Thank you, Diniz.
Fresno. And tell us a little bit. Let's start a little bit. Who is Anthony Barcellos? How the Anthony Barcellos that became the author of A Land of Milk and Money and others. But tell us a little bit about yourself. We know that you were born and raised in the Valley.
I was born in Tulare County in the city of Porterville, and my parents still live on the outskirts of Porterville on the dairy farm that was established by my grandfather, Frank Barcellos, in the late 20s.
Wow.
My brother is currently operating that dairy farm along with a number of other businesses because he's diversified. I grew up on that dairy farm and stayed there until I was about 20 when I went away to college. I went to Caltech in Pasadena. I went to Fresno State in Fresno,
Right, yes.
and I went to UC Davis, and I'm currently a resident of Davis.
Okay.
After I did all of that and got a couple of degrees in mathematics, I went to work for the state senate at the state capitol. And later I went to the state treasurer's office. I worked for State Senator Albert Rada, and later I worked for State Treasurer Jess Unruh. After those years in state service, I finally got the job I really wanted. Not to say those jobs with Senator Rada and Treasurer Unruh were bad. Those were fascinating years. But I finally got a full-time teaching position at American River College in 1987. So I'm now a 31-year veteran of the mathematics faculty. And one of the great things about teaching mathematics at American River is that it's a community college. And because it's a community college, we teach everything. I teach arithmetic and algebra and trigonometry and calculus and differential equations. So that means I don't have to worry about doing the same thing every semester, year in and year out.
Correct, yeah.
And along the way, I started writing as a hobby.
How did the literary bug come in? Was it before you were, is it something that started when you were younger in college?
The seed was planted early between graduate school at Davis and my job at the California State Senate. I did a summer internship in Albuquerque. I worked as a science writer for the Albuquerque Journal. That was a great place to do science stories because Los Alamos Scientific Laboratory is there. The Very Large Array Radio Telescope is down in the desert. Sandia Labs is right in Albuquerque itself. So I got to spend 10 weeks just doing journalism. And then 40 years later, as of this year, I've been freelancing for the Sacramento Bee and the Nevada County Union. So I've been doing stories just on the side for fun.
What kind of stories do you like, basically?
Almost everything I've done for the Bee and the Union has been what they call advance pieces, announcing things that are coming up. In particular, events involving classical music. And so I covered the Sacramento Philharmonic and Opera. I did stories about music in the mountains up in Grass Valley. And those are the sorts of things I've been doing on the side for fun.
Correct.
And
Fantastic.
somewhere in between,
yes,
this happened.
This happened. And how did this happen? Because this is first of all, this is I'm a fan of it. This is a magnificent
Thank
novel. I believe that Portuguese-Americans, every Portuguese-American should own a copy.
Thank you.
And so if you'd like a copy, we'll figure out a way to get it to you, but I'm sure it's online and all the different...
It is online from Tegas Press. It's listed on Amazon.
Okay. Land of Milk and Money is a story of the Portuguese in the Valley, basically.
My sister is somewhat concerned that I tend to blame her for the origin of the book. And she does have a quote that we cited in the back where it says, "I'm afraid you're going to get into a lot of trouble."
Yes.
And there's Mary, the author's sister. And it's because at family gatherings, as the family changed, as new people joined up, as long-lost relatives appeared or whatever, at family gatherings it became very common to swap stories about family history. And I would tell some of them. And every so often my sister would say, that needs to be written down. Someone should write a book. But there's a problem with trying to write family stories as a memoir. And part of it is that we don't know the whole story.
Correct.
We know vignettes, we can tell little stories, we could make a collection of these little stories.
Right.
But there's a very big story in our family, and in lots of immigrant families, which is how the original immigrants establish themselves, make themselves successful, make a better life for their children, and then when they're gone, their legacy comes up for grabs. Dairy farms get broken up and sold. Farms get subdivided into residential areas. And so to preserve the family traditions requires a lot of hard work. And when my grandmother died as the last member of her generation, there was a dispute over the estate, and it got very complicated and very contentious. And so I wanted to tell this story because there are very interesting things in it. But I also wanted to pay tribute to my grandfather and my grandmother, who came to this country at a difficult time and made themselves successful, showing great bravery, great diligence in what they set out to do. And so telling their story and establishing the family, and also alluding to the drama that occurred during the time of transition later, it made for a good story.
It's a very good story.
Several summers ago, in fact, I believe it was the summer of 2009, I sat down just to see what I could make of it. And 30 days later, I had a first draft. So it just poured out. And then I needed to know if I was going to do anything with it. And that was when I contacted Reinaldo Silva at the University of Aveiro. And I had read his book, Portuguese-American novels. And I had been reading Catherine Vaz and Darrell Caston. And I thought, I need to find out if this is publishable. And Reinaldo said, you have to talk to Tegas Press at the University of Massachusetts. And they accepted it. And they published it in 2012, and that's the source of that novel.
And there aren't, unfortunately, many Portuguese Americans writing, and writing especially this quality of work. And I do mean quality of work. I love reading. It's what I do for spare time. And and I've read a lot of Portuguese-Americans who have written many different short stories or even novels, and I too am a fan of Catherine. I like Frank Gaspar, and a couple others. And but I think there hasn't been a story told like this one that involves drama. Yes, of course, as all good novels will.
Right.
But involves also this idiosyncratic way that the Portuguese have, that's right, I've taken a lot from this novel, have established in the valley. I mean, it's a particular different lifestyle, okay, than Portuguese-Americans would have had they, and do have, when they live in a suburb of Fall River,
right,
or New Bedford or Newark, New Jersey. I think what you have established, besides being a great story, besides being a great read, I think this is the first novel that I've read from California that establishes the trueness of the Portuguese in the rural area, and some of the joys and some of the tribulations of it.
Having seen it from the inside, I was able to recount as a witness how a family develops over the years. And it wasn't until I went away to college that I had a good sense of how different the Portuguese-American family can be. We have a bubble of continuing culture. And in the valley in particular, the Azorean influence is so strong. We have our festas. And in that sense, it continues as a thread in California culture, even as some features like the language fades.
Right.
I grew up speaking Portuguese, minha primeira língua, but without grandparents to speak to on a regular basis. I've fallen out of the habit of using it.
Correct.
Another thing is that I function in English at school and in education and in writing. And so if I speak Portuguese, I speak it in a kind of stunted way. It was what I used with avó and avô. And I would use it occasionally with my parents when I was little, but after I go to school, after we get a television, and English comes flooding in. So I have tried to preserve a flavor of the Portuguese
Yes, there is.
in the novel, and I think I was mostly successful with that.
Very.
And the other part, the reason it's a novel instead of a memoir, was so that I could hook the pieces together and I could speculate about motivations.
Correct.
I had uncles who did not get along.
Sure.
To this day, I don't know the specific reason.
Right.
But you can't have characters who don't have motivations.
Correct.
You can report, well, this is what they did. Why? People want to know why. So clothing this in a fictional costume made it possible for me to make a coherent story from A to Z, from the inception to the conclusion, and to have people acting in a way that reflected their motivations, their interior dialogues, which I can't do in a memoir.
Sure.
But in fictional form,
Correct.
I was able to do it.
Correct.
And so I'm pleased with the way it's worked out for the most part.
Well, and I think it's a very important contribution to the Portuguese-American story in California. As a matter of fact, here at Fresno State, one of your alma maters.
Yes.
Here at Fresno State, there's a development. There's a phase right now I'm going through of a possible Portuguese studies program. And
Excellent.
my dream for Fresno State, not that necessarily I would do it, but that we would have a course on the Portuguese-American experience, and I think this book needs to be taught because it should be part of the curriculum at any university that deals with Portuguese studies. So congratulations and thank you for doing that, because I believe that it's important enough for that. And it's one of this, what you mentioned exactly, as folks, as people, as the older generations pass on, many stories have gone
They're lost.
with them to the grave. Yeah, we've done a pretty bad job as a community not registering those stories. You know, sometimes the Dr. Eduardo Mayan Diaz, a good friend, old friend from UCLA, registers some of those stories in Portuguese. But many of the stories, unfortunately, have gone to the grave, and it's sad. And I'm glad that one of these stories, in a fictional matter, is here in Land of Milk and Money.
It's somewhat embarrassing, the degree to which we hold some responsibility for losing those stories.
Sure.
And it wasn't true in my family, but I am aware of other families who came over to this country and then shut down the language, shut down the stories from the old country, because we're Americans now in California, we must speak English. Maybe we need to change our last name so it's more anglicized. So things of that sort, although they're understandable, they're highly regrettable. And I am pleased that my grandparents were willing to tell stories about the old country. And one of them turned into a short story that was published in this collection.
This is Writers of the Portuguese Diaspora in the United States. Tell us a little bit about that story.
In that case, my grandfather told the story of his grandfather. And I recall as a child being told that back in the old country, back on the island of Terceira, where my grandparents came from, my grandfather, Francisco, was known as Chico do Antônio do Mestre Francisco. His descent was specified, so they knew which Francisco they were talking about. Right. And my great-grandfather, Francisco, or Mestre Francisco, master or maestro or professor, was a craftsman of consummate skill. And he did something similar to what my grandfather did. He went to Brazil to make his fortune and then returned to the islands. And later my grandfather, emulating his grandfather, came to the New World, but he decided to come to the US, to California. And he ended up stuck. They planned to go back and it never quite worked out. They put down roots, is what happened. In my great-great-grandfather's case, Mestre Francisco took his brood and took them to Brazil. And partway across the Atlantic, the paddle steamer they were on broke down. And the crew repaired it. And when they started it up again, it broke down. According to the family story, the crew attempted repairs twice and failed both times. And they were running low on the stores required to fix the drive mechanism, which is at the point that my great-great-grandfather said, I can do that. And the captain was fed up with the crew's attempt and let Mestre Francisco take a crack at it. Whereupon he succeeded, they got to Brazil, and my great-great-grandfather had a letter, a effusive letter of introduction from the captain, with which he obtained jobs while he was in Brazil, earned money, and went back to the Azores.
And this story continued. I mean, it was passed on generation to generation.
And as a matter of fact, I have heard this story from my grandfather and from my father's first cousin, because her father was the boy, the son of Mestre Francisco, who was on board for this event. And so she had heard it from my great-grandfather.
Fantastic, fantastic.
And it corroborated things. It's written as fiction because I don't have all the details.
Right, right.
But I looked up the mechanisms of paddle steamers to try to find out what it was my great-great-grandfather had done to repair it. And it was originally in my novel. This was a part of my Land of Milk and Money novel to explain one of the motivations of my grandfather, that he was emulating his grandfather. And the editor said, it's a lovely story. It delays the action too much. And so when the Diaspora collection was announced, I submitted it and it was accepted for publication.
As it should be. You also represented Untamed Dreams, with Faces of America, which is just published here by the Portuguese Heritage Publications of California, the only publishing house that we have that here. And tell us about the story that you've...
That collection is entirely nonfiction. This is in the form of memoirs. And so I wrote a story about my grandfather. When I was in high school, in fact, I think it started when I was in like 8th grade or something, I started ordering books because we had small bookstores in Porterville. But you could mail order books. And my grandfather was the person responsible for going to the post office. And so you would make out an order, you would write on the envelope the exact amount of the purchase order, the money order that was needed, and you would slip the cash inside. Then you'd give it to Grandpa, he'd go to the post office, he'd make the money order, he'd stick it in there, he'd come back, give you the slip so that you had the slip, and usually he would give you your money back. He was subsidizing my book purchases. Sure. I have many books that my grandfather bought for me over the years. Everything from advanced math books that I got that I couldn't understand yet at the time, to science fiction novels like Edgar Rice Burroughs that I was reading at the time. And usually, he paid for them. And so one time, I gave him an order and I didn't put cash inside because Grandpa was going to pay for it. He brought it back. He said, "You forgot the money inside." And I learned not to assume if I didn't provide the money, he wasn't going to put the order in. And so the lesson that I had mistakenly learned was that Grandpa pays for it.
Right.
No, you have to respect the process. And 9 times out of 10, I got my money back. And so I owe my late grandfather the credit for a big part of my book collection during the years of high school right up to my first year of junior college, when unfortunately he became an invalid and he couldn't do it anymore. But I've never forgotten that, and when it came time to write nonfiction pieces for Untamed Dreams, I thought, I'm going to write The Book Collector about what Avu did for me, and to pay tribute for all that he did. And 2 things that are specific in that. This comes down through the generations. My father, in the family home, built a bookcase that's mounted on the wall in what was the living room and later became the family room after remodeling. And several summers later, when I was home from college, I built a bookcase on another wall. So bookcases and books are part of the family heritage.
That's wonderful.
And that's one of the reasons why I can never successfully clean house.
Anthony, we thank you so much. Our time is about up. Thank you so much for taking the time from Sacramento to drive down to the Valley. Again, I want to invite our audiences to not only read Untamed Dreams and the Diaspora book, but basically Land of Milk and Money. It's a fascinating novel. If you'd like to get a hold of me, as Anthony said, it's available online, Amazon, and through Take Express from the East Coast. I'll be more than happy also to facilitate any way that we can to get the novel to Portuguese Americans, the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th generations, because it is a book about us, about a family that relates to many of our families here, particularly in the Valley, and I would say throughout the state of California. Congratulations on the novel. Thank you so much for coming down, and hopefully the novel will one day be translated to Portuguese.
That would be wonderful. Muito obrigado.
Obrigado, eu. E mais uma vez os nossos agradecimentos aos amigos telespectadores, ao autor, ao escritor Anthony Barcellos, com raízes aqui no Vale de São Joaquim, na cidade de Porterville, aqui no Condado de Tolar, que é autor deste romance chamado, portanto, Land of Milk and Money, ou seja, terra de leite e dinheiro, mais uma tradução literal, mas que é em inglês. E eu convido-vos, particularmente aqueles que leem inglês, a lerem este livro, e aqueles que não leem inglês, eu convidaria, como o avô do Anthony fazia, como ele contou em inglês, eu convidaria os nossos amigos telespectadores, que são avós, a comprarem este livro e oferecerem este livro aos vossos netos. Porque eles, obviamente, que leem em inglês, não é? Leem nas escolas, na escola primária, na escola secundária ou nas universidades. E, portanto, eu convidaria aqueles que são avós aqui no Vale de São Joaquim, aqui na área do Canal 49, entre Bakersfield e Merced, para comprarem este livro, Land of Milk and Money, e para oferecerem aos vossos netos, para que eles possam ler uma história que é representativa de muitas outras histórias dos portugueses em terras americanas. Muito obrigado pela vossa atenção. Como eu agradeci em inglês, muito obrigado ao Anthony Barcellos, autor e professor de matemática em Sacramento, na Universidade, por ter deslocado de Sacramento a Fresno, uma longa viagem para estar com os nossos amigos telespectadores, e mais uma vez a continuação de um magnífico verão de 2018 para todos, e não se esqueçam de fazerem esta ofertazinha para os vossos netos, para que eles também conheçam uma história, como eu disse, representativa de muitas histórias. Um abraço para todos, com muito gosto que aqui no Canal 49, o programa Os Portugueses no Vale, continua a falar em português ou em inglês, mas sobre as tradições, sobre a cultura, sobre a presença portuguesa em terras da Califórnia. Temos uma história muito rica e, tal como Anthony escreveu aqui, também todos nós precisamos passá-la para as futuras gerações. Um abraço, meus amigos, e até de hoje a 8 dias, se Deus quiser.